This presentation is sponsored by Healing by Human Design.
What would you say to someone considering taking this course?
Do it. Just trust your gut.
Trust your gut, and it's extraordinary. Absolutely.
It will change your life, and for the better. And it will change your relationships, and it will change the way you will. I just think it has the possibility of teaching you not to judge and live happy.
Are you ready to take your health and wellness career to the next level? Have you always dreamed of having a career in natural medicine? Do you need to expand and protect your professional health practice with proper credentials? Then take the next step and start an exciting, successful and meaningful career by enrolling in an online degree program in natural and integrative medicine at Quantum University.
Hi everybody, Dr. Joe Dispenza here. I wanted to take some time and go over some of the quantitative research that we've been doing over the last 4.5 years at our advanced workshops. And I think the biggest reason I started doing measurements is because we started noticing significant changes in people's health right during our workshops. In other words, they came in with a health condition like lupus or MS or rheumatoid arthritis or celiac disease. And they went through 3 days of training or 4 days of training, and somehow at the end of the event, they had a very significant change in their health. And I realized during that time that there must have been some changes taking place in their biology, in their brain, in their chemistry, in their genes, right during our events, and they were taking place, those events were taking place, internal events were producing objective changes in a person's health. So I assembled a team of researchers and scientists, and I wanted to start taking measurements. And one of the measurements we've started doing was just typical EEGs, quantitative electroencephalographic readings. And I changed the whole format of my workshops after that point, and we started doing these advanced workshops that were 4 days, 4 or 5 days, where people had an opportunity to retreat from their lives and remove the constant stimulation in their external environment that reminds them of who they are as a personality. If they could separate themselves from the people they know and the places they go and the things that they do at the exact same time every single day, and retreat from their lives long enough to learn some information, vital information about transformation. And I think science is the contemporary model of mysticism. And when you combine a little quantum physics with a little neuroscience, a little neuroendocrinology, a little psychoneuroimmunology, and even a little bit about epigenetics, I think it builds a sound model for people to understand what they're doing and why. And when you understand the what and the why, the how gets easier. So when those people retreated from their lives and we gave them the proper information to build a model of understanding, and then setting up the conditions in their environment to give them the proper instructions to apply that information, a certain percentage of those people are going to get their behaviors to match their intentions and their actions equal to their thoughts. If they get their mind and body working together, there should be some type of transformation. Well, my idea was if I could measure that transformation and interpret it, I would have more information to teach transformation the next time. And if I could then teach it a little bit better and record the changes and analyze those changes objectively, I would have more information to teach transformation, and my hope was to close the gap between knowledge and experience. And so we've done a lot of quantitative studies with the brain. We do pre and post measurements. Students come to our workshops. We measure their brains before they start the event. They go through 4 or 5 days training, and at the end of the 4 or 5 days, we remeasure their brain. We do a post measurement. And I wanted to see that the changes just weren't taking place in their mind, they were taking place in their brain. In addition, I also wanted to look at what happens in the brain during meditation, that we use the model of meditation to make significant changes in our internal states so that we can present ourselves back into our external environment and no longer have our environment control how we think and feel, to regulate internal states independent of the conditions in our outer world. And so we started measuring real-time meditations, and we wanted to see what type of changes take place right during the meditative process, and see if we could correlate a person's subjective experience, their inward experience, with some objective change, and find out what exactly works in meditation and what doesn't, and to build a better model of understanding once again. So we've done thousands and thousands of brain scans. In addition, we've partnered with HeartMath Institute, and we measure heart coherence. And heart coherence, of course, is a function of a person's ability to sustain elevated emotional states. That when we live in fear, we live in anxiety, we live in resentment, frustration, impatience, the heart beats very incoherently when we're living by those survival states, those stressful states. And when we teach people to combine a clear intention, which is a function of a coherent brain, with an elevated emotion, which is a function of a coherent heart, that when you start feeling gratitude, when you start feeling inspired, when you start feeling the love for life, the joy for existence, turns out the heart starts beating more coherently. And the heart producing a measurable magnetic field, that energy, that frequency carries information. So we teach our students to use that energy to then create a future or to change their health, because that energy will carry a thought or an intention or a message. And when that occurs, they begin to change their own expression of electromagnetic signature around their body. And so when we change our energy, we change our health and we change our life. So we've done thousands and thousands of HRV measurements. And what we do in our workshops is we give our students a HRV device to wear on their chest with a lead, and we're measuring their heart and how it functions over a 24-hour period of time. And when they walk into a meditation and they sit down and they start the process, we want to see if they're able to sustain that state for an extended period of time. And then when we can see the changes that they make, then we know we can tell them what you're doing is actually correct, keep doing it. Or if they're not doing it well enough, we can give them more information on how to do it better. And so our students then are combining that clear intention with an elevated emotion, is beginning to create changes in their biology. So we've measured the energy of the room with sophisticated instruments, we've measured the energy around people's bodies, we measure the energy centers of their bodies, we've measured neurotransmitters, we've measured epigenetic changes, protein expression. We've done a host of different tests and studies. And I want to talk to you not about all the research because there's not enough time, but I want to talk to you about some of the research that I think that's relevant to the course subject matter. So here we go. The concept that we use is what's called information the transformation. And I believe that if you give people sound scientific information and they begin to learn that information, every time they learn something new, there's new synaptic connections that are forged in their brain. That's what learning is. But if they don't repeat that information, if they don't review it, if they don't think about it over and over again, the research shows that those circuits prune apart. So if learning is making new synaptic connections, then remembering or memories are maintaining those connections. So our model is have people retreat from their lives and change their personalities, change how they think, change how they act, and change how they feel, and that's their personality. And their personality is connected to their personal reality. So once they learn that vital information, if they can't turn to the person next to them and explain it, then that model of understanding isn't wired in their brain. But if they can explain it, they begin to build the model of understanding that begins to install the neurological hardware in their brain in preparation for the experience. And the more they understand what they're doing, and the more they understand why they're doing it, the how gets a lot easier. So once they have that model clear in their mind, if I can set up the conditions in their environment and give them the proper instruction, if they can get their behaviors to match their intentions or their actions equal to their thoughts, if they can get their mind and body working together, they're going to have some type of physical transformation. So then measuring that transformation, of course, gives me more information to teach transformation. And that's the model that we use. And I now know that combining that clear intention, which is a function of brain coherence, so that they're focused on an idea, a concept, a potential reality, combined with an elevated emotion, that elevated emotion takes them from the stress states of survival into a more elevated state. And now emotions no longer keep us connected to our past, but it's the very fuel that drives us to our future. Not only does it have an effect on our body, but on some level it has effect on the nature of reality. So that's the model that we use. We did a study in 2016 in Tacoma, Washington. We took a group of students in our advanced workshop, and we randomized the study into two groups. We had participants that were actively engaged in the advanced workshop, and we had a placebo group of people doing something completely different. We had 513 participants in the study. We did 117 brain scans, and we measured cortisol levels and a chemical called salivary immunoglobulin A. Now, immunoglobulin A is the primary defense against bacteria and viruses. It's better than any flu shot. It's the body's natural chemical that begins to create an internal defense system. And so, as cortisol levels go up because of stress, IgA levels go down. Immune system is compromised as stress hormones go up. Well, the reason is very simple. If you're mobilizing all your body's energy and resources for some threat in your external environment, you have very little energy for growth and repair in your internal environment. So our hypothesis was, well, let's see then if we teach people how to create heart coherence, to change their emotional state, to go from those survival chemicals to more elevated states, will IgA levels go up, which is what we were after more than anything else, and will cortisol levels go down? So we did salivary samples before and after the event, and our pre and post measurements were also connected to psychological evaluations. We measure people's level of post-traumatic stress disorder, their levels of happiness, their levels of pain, their levels of anxiety, as well as their physical functioning. And I think it's important to continue assessing people's changes after the event to let us know that if those changes are sustained for a period of time. And so we did several psychological assessments and evaluations that measured all of these particular areas. What we found that physiological assessment with cortisol and IgA were two markers, but we also wanted to do an analysis of what was happening in people's brains. We wanted to see if they were able to sustain a stable alpha coherent state for a period of time. We also know that when people are living in the brainwave pattern of high beta brainwave patterns, that they tend to be over-aroused and overstimulated, and the brain is overactive. When the brain is overly analytical and overly stimulated, it's not in its most healthy state, because over time, brain function tends to become more and more incoherent. So a student's ability to change their brain waves from beta to alpha, even into theta, and even some students approaching a deeper state of delta, allows them then to make significant changes in their internal state and also make their inner world more real than their outer world, become more suggestible to information. Well, what we found as a result of our 4-day event, that the time that it took to acquire a stable alpha state improved by 20% out of those 117 participants that had their brain measured. Their ratio between delta brainwaves and beta brainwaves improved by 60%. The randomized study shows that it's about 1 in 1,000 statistically that's left to chance. Their ability to move from high beta brainwaves into more stable brainwaves, lowering them, was improved by 124%. They increased their ability to sustain a coherent alpha brainwave state by 149%. That's pretty significant. Cortisol levels dropped to some degree, but their IgA levels, their immune function, went up almost 50%. Now, genes make proteins, and proteins are responsible for the structure and function of your body. So they used to say that genes create disease. We know that's not the truth anymore. And now research shows that it's the environment that signals the gene that begins to change our genetic expression. But emotions are the end product of experiences in our environment. So then when a student begins to embrace an elevated emotion, they're actually signaling the gene ahead of the environment, because when we're talking about the environment, we're talking about the outside of the cell, which is still the inside of the body. So when a person then begins to create an elevated state, their body, as the unconscious mind, is beginning to believe it's living in a new environmental condition, because it does not know the difference between what's happening in their outer world and what's happening in their inner world. It's exactly the same. So in 4 days, we upregulated genes to promote health in our immune system. And the emotions of gratitude, the emotions of love, the emotions of care and kindness and appreciation, of inspiration, tend to be those elevated emotions that actually heal us. Why do we do that study? Because we see people with all kinds of immune-mediated conditions in a very short amount of time improve their genetic expression and improve their health. So we wanted to see if it was related to what we teach in our workshops. And there's a strong correlation now between elevated emotions and gene expression. We also had another study in Tampa in 2017 of this year where we did an advanced workshop and we measured gene expression once again. We measured thousands of genes, and we took people once again, retreated them from their lives. We asked them then to begin to change their internal states. Meditation was the model that we used, but we did 4 types of meditations. We did sitting meditation, we did a standing meditation, we did a walking meditation, and we did a lying down meditation. All of those different meditations were to be able to regulate a state, begin to make it more natural and more of a habit. We found that in just 4 days, there was a significant change in gene expression, and 8 genes were the most common amongst the group that we studied. One of the genes that was upregulated was for neurogenesis, not just for new synaptic connections, but the growth of new neurons in response to a novel experience and learning. So then our students then were able to actually make significant brain changes. Another gene for cellular repair was also activated. This particular gene activates stem cells to move to damaged tissues and aging tissues and help to regenerate them. A gene for oxidative balance, for free radical scavenging. Of course, oxidative balance has everything to do with anti-cancer, anti-aging, anti-heart disease, anti-stroke, anti-neurodegenerative, anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial. Healthy oxidative balance sustains health in a person's body. Also, we notice a gene that has to do with building cellular structures. The cellular structures called microtubules and cytoskeletons give the cell integrity. So as cells begin to repair, they need a scaffolding to repair onto, and the gene that actually creates cellular structures for healthy cells was also upregulated. We see a lot of times in a lot of our students that cancer begins to change, their values begin to drop, their tumors begin to shrink, and we see in our work that the gene for suppressing cancer growth in tumors was also activated. These are the genes, specific genes, that were actually activated, and I'll just put them up here if you just want to review them. Now, we use meditation as a model, as I said, and I'm just going to do a quick review on brainwaves. That first, very top bar under the word brainwaves shows what we call beta brainwaves. And your brain's job is to create meaning and coherence between what's going on in your outer world and what's going on in your inner world. When your brain is plugged into your external environment and you have a level of awareness of your body in space and time, your senses are picking up all this information, everything you're seeing, you're hearing, you're smelling, you're feeling, you're tasting. And because you have your awareness on so many things and the brain has to integrate all that information, when you measure a person's brain waves, they're in beta brain waves. It means awareness or levels of wakefulness. And in beta, our outer world tends to be more real than our inner world. You close your eyes or you begin to relax and you get calm. Even if you close your eyes, you have less sensory information coming into your brain. You're not seeing as much. If you're sitting still, of course, and you're not moving as much, you're not feeling as much, you're not eating, you're not smelling, you're not tasting. your brainwaves slow down into what's called alpha brainwave patterns. Alpha tends to be more of the realm of relaxation and imagination. We tend to think less and we tend to image more. We see more in pictures in alpha. And in alpha, we're putting more attention on our inner world than we are on our outer world. Theta is when your body begins to fall asleep. It's more sleep than it is awake, and at the same time, your conscious mind is awake. And so if your body is asleep and your mind is awake, then most of the programs that we have where our body has been conditioned to be the mind, our habits, tend to be suppressed. And so in theta, we see very significant changes in healing taking place. Delta is when the body is in restorative sleep and the body's in a catatonic state. There's very little brain function in delta. There's dreaming that goes on in REM sleep. And then the last brainwave pattern that we've been noticing quite a bit in our research is gamma brainwave patterns. Now, in beta, you have different levels of beta, which I'll show in the next couple slides here. But in beta, when you go into what's called high beta, that's when you're perceiving a threat in your outer world. That's when you're angry, when you're frustrated, when you're fearful. The brain gets over-aroused, but it's usually getting over-aroused by something in the outer world. In gamma, a person's brainwave patterns are in a very, very fast pattern, almost faster than beta many times. And in that state of gamma, what happens is the brain is being aroused from an inner event, no longer from an outer event. And that gamma experience creates a super level of awareness, a super level of consciousness, a heightened state of wakefulness. And whatever's going on between the person's ears, whatever's going on in their mind, is more real than what typically goes on in their external environment. And all of the brain's attention then, or all the person's attention, is caught up in the inner experience. And since experience enriches the brain, which it does, and experience produces emotions, we see very significant biological changes in a very short amount of time. And I'll show you at least one or two of those when we get to some of the case studies. So check it out. Brainwave function, delta is about 0.5 to 4 cycles per second, very slow. Theta is about 4 to 8 cycles per second. Alpha is about 8 to 13 cycles per second. Now check out the different levels of beta. Low-level beta is when you're just relaxed and you're learning information. There's no threat in your environment. Good place to learn in, 13 to 15 cycles per second. It's just a little bit higher than alpha. And when we learn stuff, we move from beta to alpha. You learn information, you pay attention to it, you pause for a minute, your brain shifts over to alpha, you begin to make your inner world more real than your outer world, and you can consolidate information neurologically in your brain. If you look at mid-range beta, it's about 16 to 22 cycles per second. That's when you're focusing a little bit more. If you're taking an exam or you're taking a test, your brain is perked up a little bit more and there's more energy in your brain. It's a healthy state. When you have a little good nervous tension, or if you're giving a lecture or whatever, you're in a little bit mid-range beta, but you can actually work with it. It's manageable. But when you go into high beta brainwave patterns, it could be up to 22 to 50 cycles per second or more. And in high beta, it's 3 times higher than low-level beta, and even more. And in this state, the brain is over-aroused. When it's over-aroused in this state, this is when the brain gets stuck and stays switched on, and no new information can enter the nervous system that isn't equal to the emotion the person is experiencing. Why? Because it's not a time to learn. It's not a time to go within. It's not a time to open our heart. It's not a time to trust. It's not a time to sit still. It's not a time to create community and connect. It's actually a time to run, to fight, to hide, or to freeze. And people spend a good majority of their waking day, many people, stuck in high beta. So they look for things outside of them to regulate their emotional states, and that's how the conditioning process starts for us to rely on external exogenous substances to change our internal states. Our model of meditation is about slowing brain waves down from beta to alpha to theta. And of course, that process then requires certain techniques. When we're living in stress hormones, or we're living under the gun of the fight or flight nervous system, we tend to try to control and predict everything that's taking place in our life. And when we get stuck in this state, when there's a threat or a perceived threat in our outer world, we're focusing mostly in a very narrow way on an object or a person or a thing because that's where the danger is. When we get stuck in high beta, we become over-focused and we begin to narrow our focus on objects and things and problems. And all of us know that when we get under stress, we obsess about things, and that's when the brain is stuck. So then is it possible then to help people to regulate and change those states? Well, that's what the work is about that we're doing. So our model of meditation says that we have to get beyond the analytical mind. Now, research shows that by the time we're 35 years old, most of who we are is about 5% of our conscious mind. And our conscious mind is made up of things like logic and reasoning, which gives rise to our will, our creativity, our faith. The rest of who we are by the time we're 35 years old, 95% of who we are is based on the habits, the emotional reactions, the unconscious behaviors, the automatic programs of thinking, our attitudes, our beliefs and perceptions that are functioning like a subconscious computer program. In other words, you've done something so many times that your body now knows how to do it better than your conscious mind. So that's when we get stuck in the habit of being ourselves. So then, how do we get from our conscious mind into the subconscious mind to begin to make those changes? Well, the whole purpose of meditation is to get beyond the analytical mind, slow our brain waves down from our conscious mind, enter the operating system where those problems are taking place, or our limited beliefs, or our unwanted habits, our self-limiting emotional reactions, and begin to reprogram them into more constructive behaviors and emotional states. So, some of us have very thin analytical minds, a very thin veil between our conscious mind and our subconscious mind. The thin veil then allows us to become more suggestible. And suggestibility is our ability to accept, believe, and surrender to information without analyzing it. Some people, or some of us, have a more dense analytical mind, a thicker analytical mind. There's nothing wrong with this. I mean, our analytical mind helps us to reason in our life, to navigate, to learn, to discern ethically. It's a healthy thing. But when the hormones of stress are activated, most of us become overly analytical, and that's when we get stuck in high beta brainwave patterns. So then a person who has a more dense or thicker analytical mind has to work a little bit harder to get beyond themselves to enter the operating system. So the more analytical we are, the less suggestible we are to information. The less analytical we are, the less the thinking brain is working, the more suggestible we are to information. So then our job then, as we begin to get beyond the analytical mind, is to begin to slow our brain waves down from high beta to mid-range beta to low-level beta, cross the analytical mind, we enter the alpha brainwave state. Now we're in the realm of the subconscious. And if you can continuously work to slow your brain waves down, over time then, you can move all the way down into deeper states. And that's the job. That's our work in meditation. So we move from beta to alpha, from alpha to theta, and from theta to delta. And beta and alpha represent, for the most part, our conscious mind, and alpha, theta, and delta represent the realm of our subconscious mind. So as we begin to slow our brain waves down, as we begin to move from beta to alpha to theta, there is a movement of consciousness, a flow of consciousness out of the thinking neocortex into the limbic brain, or the subconscious centers of the brain. The subcortical centers of the brain have everything to do with automatic and autonomic function. So now, as we begin to slow the brain waves down and we're entering this subconscious realm, the beauty behind this is we're in the operating system because the autonomic nervous system controls most of our metabolic functions. So the autonomic nervous system is the system that creates homeostasis and balance. It's the system that does cellular repair, hormonal changes, body temperature. All those different functions are taking place under the auspices of the autonomic nervous system. So as we slow our brain waves down, now we're entering the operating system where we can begin to program it for better function of health. That's the name of the game here when it comes to changing a person's biology. So we did several different quantitative studies using EEGs, I want to show you just a basic understanding of what we're looking for. Now, don't panic here, but if you look in the upper left-hand corner, you have delta, then next to it you have theta, and then next to that you have alpha, and next to that you have beta. The second column below that is high levels of beta. So we're measuring high level beta as well. When you see a lot of red in the brain, it represents too much activity or the brain being overstimulated or hyper-aroused. The thicker the red line that you see in a brain scan, the further away from normal you move. You move in standard deviations further and further away from healthy and normal. When you see a lot of blue in the brain is shut down. There's not enough energy or there's not enough activity in the brain, and different compartments of the brain can't communicate with each other. So you have delta, you have theta, you have alpha, you have beta, and you have high beta. So red represents the brain changing channels too quickly, overstimulated, and blue represents the channels no longer communicating with each other. If you don't see any blue and you don't see any red, that's normal. And of course, the thicker the blue line, the further away from normal you go. So when we live by the hormones of stress and the brain is over-aroused and we're trying to control and predict everything in our life, as we shift our attention from one person to one problem to one thing to one place that we have to go, all of those objects and things and people and places have a neurological network in our brain. So the more the brain is over-aroused, the more we're overstimulated, the more we're shifting our attention, the more the brain begins to become compartmentalized. And as the brain begins to fire in that very aberrant way, if you were to measure those brain waves, they're very incoherent. And when the brain is incoherent, we're incoherent. And when the brain isn't working right, we're not working right. And in this state, because we're stimulating that survival gene, the main thing we do is, as I said, we narrow our focus on our external environment. We put our attention on matter, on the danger at hand. So the brain becomes very incoherent. Our research shows, as well as other research, is that when you teach a student how to go from a narrow focus and focus on matter and objects and things and people, to begin to open their focus and begin to go from what's called a convergent focus, where you narrow your focus on something, to what's called a divergent focus, where you begin to open your focus and focus on nothing, on space, on emptiness, on energy. And as a student begins to just open their focus, they begin to slow their brain waves down from beta to alpha. And not only just alpha, but a very coherent form of alpha. Well, it makes sense. Think about this. If you're no longer thinking and you're no longer analyzing because you're sensing space, as you analyze less, you're no longer activating those different circuits in your brain that are assigned to people and things and places and objects, and even time. And so now, as your brain waves begin to change, the autonomic nervous system, whose job is to create balance and wholeness and order, steps in and begins to create coherence in the brain. And the brain begins to synchronize. Different compartments of the brain that were once subdivided begin to work in unison. As they begin to synchronize, what syncs in the brain begins to link in the brain, and the person begins to become more whole, or at least feel more whole, or at least feel more relaxed, more connected, more spontaneous. They trust more. Their brain is working better. When the brain is working better, we're working better. So we measured 19 different parts of the brain when we put those caps on. And what we're looking for is a rhythm, a coherence. All those different areas of the brain working together, all the waves lining up. And as the waves line up, we can say that the brain is functioning in a coherent state. When the brain gets out of balance, of course, those waves start to move a little bit off, and now the brain is functioning in an incoherent state. And now different compartments of the brain are no longer working together. It's like a house divided against itself. So then, we also measure how much coherence is taking place in the brain. So we have a low level of coherence. We can measure it in a specific way. We see a lot of blue in the brain. As a person begins to create a little bit more coherence, there's a certain level of coherence and incoherence that takes place, but for the most part it's functional. But then you can measure a high level of coherence, what we call supercoherence, and it looks something like that. And I want you to see that because I'm going to show you a couple examples. So in the couple slides before where I was showing you hyperactivity in those what's called z-scores or hypoactivity, that's one measurement. But in another measurement where we see blue and when we're measuring coherence, blue represents a low level of coherence. In a scale where we're measuring coherence, when we see a lot of red, it means that there's a lot of coherence. So there are two different measurements. I just want you to understand that. So coherence then, to me, represents health, the more orderliness, the more synchronization that's taking place, the more rhythm, the more oscillations, the more harmony that's taking place where everything's working together, represents an expression of health. An expression of health is an expression of life and energy. When you see incoherence, I call that disease. And according to the quantum model of reality, as far as I'm concerned, all disease is a lowering of frequency and an incoherent message. So if you take a coherent signature and you begin to overlay it over incoherence, all of a sudden that coherence is going to begin to entrain that incoherence, and we can call that a healing. So this is the best way that I can describe coherence in the brain. Let each one of these different metronomes represent a neurological network in your brain. You can see then each one of these different segments are functioning in a way what we would call incoherence. They're not in rhythm, they have their own specific agenda, they're working out of balance. But when we teach students how to go from a narrow focus to an open focus, and they can become aware that they're in an infinite space, an eternal space, and sense the vastness of this space, as they begin to create a divergent focus, and they're able to sustain that divergent focus, coherence begins to consume incoherence, and it happens in the brain and the heart over and over again. And of course, when the brain is coherent and the heart is coherent, we feel more connected, we trust a lot more, we're more in love with life, our energy is different, and even our life begins to show up different. So over time, you're seeing that there's a pattern taking place here where those metronomes are becoming more coherent. That's exactly what happens in the brain and in the heart as a person begins to regulate internal states. So imagine we have a community of people, 500 to 1,000 people, and we're going through training every day from 6 in the morning till 6 in the evening, and they're working on changing their internal states, they're working on creating more coherence. We have specific techniques that we use, and by the end of the third day or the fourth day, their brain is way more organized because they're practicing. Now take a look at the right-hand side of the screen, the second metronome from the front. You can see that that one is still out of order. That's just kind of like a voice in our head that's saying, I can't, it's too hard, I'll never change, something's wrong with me, how come my life isn't working, I want to quit. But if we keep persisting and we keep connecting and we keep opening up, changing our expression of attention, sooner or later coherence begins to consume incoherence. And this is exactly what happens in the brains of our students. So this is called a strip chart. The strip chart tells us the number of cycles per second that's taking place between those two vertical blue lines. It can tell us if a student is in beta, a student is in alpha, a student is in theta, a student is in gamma. And we started noticing when a student was able to open their focus and begin to sense nothing, that all the compartments of their brain began to function more coherently. Now that's a great example of global alpha synchronized coherent brainwave patterns. The entire brain of this student is working in an order. It's working in a synchronized way. The whole brain is working together. That's a very holistic brain. So normal And take a look at that. That's beautiful alpha patterns, and you can even see that there's a little bit more energy in the brain, higher waves and higher valleys and troughs and points represent more energy in the brain. So this is a person who came into our event with severe anxiety. Take a look at the front of the brain. Most of the brain in delta and theta and alpha and beta and even high beta, the blue represents that there's no energy in the frontal lobe. Now, the frontal lobe is the CEO of the brain. It's the symphony leader. If the boss or the symphony leader is no longer leading the orchestra or leading the community, the rest of the brain has a very strong tendency to move out of disorder, just like any organization. 3 days of meditation, you can see that there's very little red in the brain. If there's no blue and there's no red, it represents normal. Now you can see that there's a certain amount of symmetry that's taking place on the right side there. It represents that the person's in a more coherent and balanced, coherent brainwave state. Another person comes to our event, severe anxiety. You can see all that red in the brain, and high beta represents a lot of vigilance and a lot of anxiety. 3 days later after the event, you don't see any red in there. This person healed themselves of anxiety as well. Person with Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's disease is deficiency in dopamine in the brain. When there's not enough dopamine in the brain, the upper motor neurons can't communicate with each other. When there's an aberrant motor function that's taking place in the neurons of the brain, it sends a very spastic signal to the body, and people experience involuntary tremors with Parkinson's disease. 3 days of meditation. Look at this person's brain. It represents way more coherence and much less overactive brain activity. Now, we do another measurement called the quantitative EEG. It's very simple. If you look at the first 5 on the top row there, if you see 1 hertz, 2 hertz, 3 hertz, 4 hertz, that represents, as we learned, that's delta. 5, 6, 7, 8 through the second row is theta. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 is alpha, and then you have beta after that. If you see a lot of blue in the brain, it's 3 standard deviations below normal. You see a lot of red in the brain, it's 3 standard deviations above normal. Blue means there's not enough energy in the brain. Red means there's a lot of energy in the brain. You see a lot of red, of course, it indicates a lot of activity. If you see green, it's normal. And then you have different shades of blue as you move towards green, and different shades of orange and yellow as you move towards green, from hot to neutral and from cold to neutral. So this is that same person with Parkinson's disease. Look at all that blue in alpha and in beta. This person has problems with learning. This person has problems with speech. This person has problems with streams of consciousness. This person has problems with memory. Take a look at their brain. There's not enough energy in their brain to control their body. The brain doesn't have enough energy. 3 days of meditation, all of a sudden you see a significant change in that person's brain. Remember, green is normal. In the bottom right-hand corner, those 3 specific areas in beta where there's a lot of red represents anxiety. And when we talked to this person, we said, hey, don't worry, that's anxiety. And she said, you know, when I'm anxious, my tremors get worse. So we asked her to continue doing her meditations. A few months later, we measure her brain again. You can see that that red is diminishing, and she's improving even more. Now, this person had a significant change in 4 days after our advanced workshop, where most of her tremors went away. As she continued to do the work, she continued to improve. But then she had a family tragedy, and she had to take care of her affairs. She stopped doing the work, and you can see that the bottom 3 and 4 areas of beta, that area of the brain is switched back on, and of course her anxiety is a little bit higher because of some of the issues that were going on in her life. We asked her, don't worry about it, just take care of your affairs, but please, if you could, please start doing your meditation again. She started doing her meditations again. You can see that there's a significant improvement. And then look at that, just in July, she has a very nice change in her brain activity. 90% of this person's Parkinson's disease has gone away by thought alone. Significant change. Traumatic brain injury, passenger in a car went through the windshield of the car. Impact was on his head. He had a spinal cord injury. He's wheelchair bound. You see a lot of blue in his entire brain. The brain is switched way off. The brain is not communicating well with other parts, and there's just not enough energy in the brain to control the body. Take a look at his brain just 3 days later. He has a lot more energy in the brain, and the brain is working a whole lot better. Here's his QEEG study. If you look at, just like the person with Parkinson's, you're looking at his brain in alpha and beta, and you're seeing a lot of blue in the brain as well. Well, that blue on the left-hand side shows us problems with concentration in the front, problems with language, problems with vision, problems with streams of consciousness, problems with levels of alertness and wakefulness, problems with learning new things. Take a look at his brain just a few days later. Green represents normal. This man has now bladder control and bowel control. He's crawling. He's got significant changes going on in his health as a result of his conviction to do the work. This is a CEO of a company in Phoenix, Arizona. She's an attorney. She's a mom. Very smart lady. This is what we call intrusive thoughts. She's seeing a lot of pictures in her brain. The right back portion of the brain represents the visual cortex. She's seeing pictures, and then the left side of the brain where you see that orange spot, she's thinking about and talking about those pictures. It's a decent amount of anxiety. Just a few days later, we take the measurement again. Green is normal. She had a significant change in her overall level of health, mental health. This is her brain on February 20th. All that red in high beta represents a brain that's very overworked. 3 days later, you can see very little red in the brain. She keeps doing her meditations up until April, and we remeasure her brain, and you don't see any red in the brain. She had a significant change in her health. This is high beta, 21 to 30 cycles per second. That's a very, very high level of energy in the brain that represents a significant amount of vigilance and anxiety. 3 days later, during the event, you see that green in there, and that green represents normal. We tell her to keep doing her meditations. Again, now the QEG shows in high beta that there's no high activity in there. And this person had a very, very nice change in her health. This is depression. The blue at the bottom there represents not enough energy in the brain. Now we're looking at 3 days later, see all that green, very nice change. Again, this is high beta now, high level of depression in this person. And in just 3 days, the green represents a significant change. This person no longer is depressed. Look at the second case study. See that blue down in the bottom. Now, I know you're probably wondering why you keep seeing blue on that very first circle up top there at 1 Hertz delta. We see a very significant trend in our students when they connect to the unified field, that they suppress delta on that level. And when they do that, that's their ability to connect to the unified field. We see it in hundreds and hundreds of brain scans. And it's just a pattern that we notice that what it takes for them to get beyond themselves and start to connect to that energy. It is that circle on the upper left-hand side that lets us know that the person's doing the work properly. So, a lot of blue in beta and a whole lot of blue in high beta. But if you look at the pre and post, that green represents normal. Another person that came out of a very strong funk of depression here. Now, we started noticing some high amplitudes of energy taking place in the brain that really started to cause us to pay more attention to the work that we're doing. When you have waves that are in sync or they're coherent, when they come together and they interact, when the waves interact and they're coherent, they're going to create bigger waves, higher amplitudes. And the higher the amplitude of any wave, the higher the energy. And so when we have supercoherence taking place in the brain, we started noticing that the energy in the brain started going up. When you have waves that are out of phase, when they're not synchronized and they're out of rhythm, when those waves come together, they destructively interfere with each other, and it's going to diminish the amount of energy in the brain. And so when they're out of phase, we see less energy in the brain. And so our job then is to create more coherence so that the energy in the brain tends to build. When energy builds in the brain, awareness and consciousness builds in the brain. The person is more conscious of their unconscious self. Take a look at this case study here. This is a normal brain. You saw this earlier. And then we started seeing something like this. That's definitely not a normal brain. This person is experiencing a significant amount of ecstasy. They're enjoying the experience. The higher amplitudes in gamma represent that their inner event, whatever's happening between their ears, is more real than any past external event, and that's what begins to make those biological changes. This is a case study I want to talk to you about. A physician from London, England, came to our workshop. She was getting her brain mapped, and this is her normal EEG. You could see that she's in low-level beta. Things tend to look normal. That's our baseline measurement before we start the meditation. This is what her strip chart starts to look like. When we see, you can see that little bit more activity in those 4 or 5 in the lower middle section. That area of the brain is the right hemisphere, in the temporal area. And all of a sudden we start seeing energy start to build like this, and we now can predict when this happens that the person is going to have a very profound moment. And you can see the energy keeps building, you see the energy keep building, you see the energy keep building. There's more and more energy. She's going from a low level all the way up into high beta, then ultimately she moves into gamma. That's gamma right there. Now check this out. This is what we see during the process of her meditation. We start to see some energy build. We know she's having an inner event. We know that if she can stay with it, she's going to have a profound moment, and that inner event is going to become an experience that she never forgets. And since experience enriches the brain, it can literally rewire the brain. And since the brain is a record of the past, that novel moment begins to change their biology. And since experience produces an emotion, and emotions signal genes, you can begin to see that how a gene can be upregulated from one inner event. So, if you look at the right-hand side on the top, you'll see high beta there. She passes from theta to beta to high beta on her way to gamma, and all that red represents there's a lot of energy in the brain. Now, you may say, well, how come that's not the fight or flight response? Because she's sitting in her meditation, and there's no need for her to be in that fight or flight state. So many of our students, as they move into gamma, as the brain begins to become aroused, they pass through high beta in order to get there. You can see then there's a lot of energy. But look at the bottom right-hand corner here. Let's measuring coherence. And remember I showed you the one slide where it was low level, normal, and high coherence. She's experiencing a very, very high level of coherence going on in her brain. So the brain is very organized. And because it's very organized, she's super aware of the moment. We look at her amount of gamma she's experiencing in her brain. She's 140 microvolts of energy in that area of gamma in her brain, and she's over 200 standard deviations outside of normal. That's a very significant change. This person hit the sweet spot, connected to the unified field, and had a profound moment. And this is Brodmann area of the brain. Brodmann area of the brain has everything to do with high emotional content and processing. But right to the left of that red area is where the pineal gland is. And my hypothesis in the work that we do is when a person has a mystical experience, the pineal gland begins to release specific metabolites that are sister molecules to melatonin and serotonin. They fit in the same receptor sites, but it's the very chemistry that causes us to have a lucid moment or a lucid experience. And this person's area of the pineal gland is extremely stimulated. And so this is the top of her brain right here. And you can see that's gamma going on up there, but take a look underneath where the pineal gland is. That's a lot of energy taking place in that area of the brain. That's energy from the body, literally from the body. The sympathetic nervous system is ejaculating energy up the spine into the brain, and when it strikes the pineal gland, of course, the person has a very lucid and transcendental experience. Now, this person, medical doctor from London, the brain scientists thought in the beginning that she was going to have a seizure because they had never seen anything like this before. But when you see this kind of energy moving into the brain, she was having a very peak experience because there was so much energy. Now, all disease is a lowering of frequency and an incoherent message. As you begin to change the frequency of the body, then all of a sudden, as the body raises its frequency, you can have a very significant change. The inner experience then rewires the brain, sends a new emotional signal to the body. Since the environment signals the gene, an experience from anywhere producing an emotion literally begins to upregulate genes. This medical doctor from London had severe eczema from the time she was 3 months old. Now, she took all the cortisone creams, she took all the antihistamines, she watched her diet, she did all the right things, treating her body matter to matter. Monday morning after her event, this is what happened to her arm. All the eczema disappeared. Here's her hand with the eczema again. Take a look now. Her completely healed of her eczema the Monday after this experience, 1 day later. I just saw her just a month and a half ago in Rome, and she's still extremely healthy. And of course, she's had to upgrade her model about health, which is a good thing. Check this out. We were in Cancun in June of this year. This is a normal brain scan of somebody about ready to go into meditation. She's in a little bit of beta here, but it's pretty healthy beta alpha, low-level beta. And watch what happens now. This is just a few minutes into her meditation. She's going into gamma, and we know now she's having a very strong experience, and her entire brain is in that superconscious state. This brain moves into a very, very high amplitude of energy, almost impossible to record, but what we know is she's over 300 standard deviations above normal in gamma, and of course, very profound, significant changes with her as well. So, here's my theory. When you have an internal experience in your mind that carries an amplitude of energy that's greater than the hardwired programs in your brain and the emotional addictions or conditioning in your body, you can be biologically changed. Most people have an experience in their life that has branded them emotionally that's been traumatic or some type of betrayal or some type of shock. The experience then begins to emboss the circuits in their brain into a specific pattern. The experience produces a strong emotion. The stronger the emotion, the more the circuits are branded. And of course, the person moves from one state of being into another state of being. And we can say, after that experience, the body and the brain are now in the past. So what happens is we begin to develop beliefs about ourselves and our lives from our past experiences, because we tend to think neurologically and we tend to feel chemically within the boundaries of our biology based on our past memories and experiences. And how you think and how you feel becomes your state of being. And your state of being is your personality. So now the person is bound to their past. So how do we change that? Well, when a person has an inner experience, just like you saw, for example, with the physician from London, that carries an amplitude of energy that's greater than the past external experience, whatever that was in their life, that internal experience then is going to rewire the brain and send a new emotional signal to the body, and it's going to recondition the body out of the past. Now our biology changes, and we can say the past is washed away. The cool thing about that is that that event becomes an experience that the person never forgets. And of course, now their spectrum of reality is changed because we only perceive reality equal to how our circuits are organized in our brain, and this person has a very different outlook on life after that experience. This is our walking meditation. I just want to show you what happens in some of our walking meditations. A 1-hour walking meditation. This is the pre-measurement in a person's brain. You can tell he's a pretty decent meditator. He's almost in coherence there in beta. And then take a look after just walking for 1 hour what his brain looks like. Very significant change in his biology as well. We also measure heart coherence. I always say the brain thinks, but the heart knows. Elevated emotions tend to be more selfless emotions. When we feel these emotions like gratitude and joy and inspiration, when we feel love, when we feel all these peace and wholeness, trust, knowingness, presence, empowerment, we activate this center. Each one of these centers has their own consciousness, their own energy, their own emotional states. When we live in the survival emotions, of course, we tend to be more selfish, and you know the emotions that go along with that. So, each one of these blocks represents 5 minutes. And what we want to teach our students during the meditative process is to sustain heart coherence, sustain an elevated state to keep their energy up. And for this person, their first meditation for 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50 minutes, they're in heart coherence. Now, that's a pretty good level of heart coherence. That means they're sustaining that state. We break, we go into another meditation, and for another 45 minutes, this person goes back into heart coherence, showing that she's developing a skill. Next meditation, 45 minutes again, she moves back into heart coherence, and we would almost call that super coherence. Now check this out. In the bottom arrows down here, for an entire hour, she's in heart coherence. But when I looked at the data, I saw that we weren't doing a meditation during this time. And so when we talked to her, we said, what was going on while you were in such heart coherence? And she said, I was getting ready for bed. And I had such a great day, and I felt so connected that out of nowhere, I had this spontaneous amount of love take over me. It was so intense and so powerful, I had to lay on my back and let it consume me. And then if you look, you see that it kind of breaks up there, and then you see a different pattern. She rolls on her side, and she goes to sleep. And that's not a bad way to end the day. Now, just like when a person is obsessing about the worst thing that could happen in their life, and they're experiencing fear, and they're marrying some idea in their mind, some obsession in their mind with some emotion like anxiety or fear or worry, the act of doing that repetitively conditions the body to subconsciously become the mind of anxiety. The person has a panic attack over time, and they can't control it with their conscious mind because they programmed it subconsciously. This person is experiencing a spontaneous love attack. They're doing the exact same thing with the same mechanism as fear, but the body's being conditioned to spontaneously experience love. And I think that's a healthy, healthy example of how we should be living all the time. These are 3 students that are sustaining heart coherence for 45 minutes. Now, when a person has brain coherence and heart coherence, they're certainly more internally regulated than anything going on in their external environment, and they're less likely to react, they're less likely to make mistakes, they're more likely to trust and more likely to create and believe in themselves. This person, very, very weak heart, very little heart rate variability before and after those 2 red arrows. But look what they're able to do for about 15 minutes. They're changing their biology. And now, the next meditation, they're able to do it for 8 minutes, and they're changing their biology again. So heart rate variability is our ability for our heart to be flexible and adaptable and resilient. And so when we see less heart rate variability, it means the person's stuck in a certain pattern. So we want to teach our students then how to be able to make those biological changes. And these are great examples of students that were able to do it even just for a short amount of time. They're changing their internal states. Now, last couple slides here. We did an experiment where we had 575 people or 600 people in a room. We had people in the front of the room wearing heart rate monitors. And we had the rest of the audience raise their energy, open their hearts, and begin to broadcast that energy beyond their body and lay the intent on that energy for the greatest good of everybody gathered in the room, and especially for the people wearing the heart rate monitors in the front of the room. The cool thing is that all of these people went into heart coherence at the exact same time, in the exact same day, in the exact same meditation. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 people going into heart coherence. We are all connected by an invisible field of energy. Now, what is the relevance of all of this? Well, if you can get a community of people that could raise their energy and they can influence one another, we begin to emerge as one mind. One mind means now we're working as a community. We're working in wholeness and oneness. And just like a group of fish that are all moving as one mind, or a flock of birds that are all moving as one mind, there's no separation between them. And you look at this in biology and you think that there's a leader that everybody's following, that there's a top-down phenomenon. It turns out there is no leader. It's a bottom-up phenomenon. Everybody's leading. And what does that have to do with us in the world? Well, if we can sustain these states independent of all the things that are trying to program us into separation, I think a new consciousness, a new human being will emerge where we're less reliant on things outside of us and believe in ourselves more. Thanks for listening.
Quantum University is the world's largest institution of higher learning to provide online degrees and certification programs in holistic, alternative, natural, and integrative medicine based on the science of quantum physics. The International Quantum University for Integrative Medicine, IQUIM, also known as Quantum University, is an online degree-granting institution located in the state of Hawaii in downtown Honolulu. Students can earn bachelor's, master's, doctorate and PhD degrees, leading to professional board certifications. Quantum University's mission is to build a new future for medicine, one student at a time. Graduates of Quantum University take their health and wellness career to the next level and follow their dreams to start a new, exciting, successful and meaningful career in integrative medicine.